Today we talk about the life of Ichimaru Gin. Ichimaru Gin is easily one of the most misunderstood and most phenomenally written characters in Bleach. In honor of the new 1000-year Blood War arc, we are talking about the gravity of his lie. The lie so important that he was willing to give his life to do so, and in order to truly understand this, we must make an effort to properly understand Gin as a character and the reasons for the life that he led. To truly understand Gin, it's important that we dissect Kubo's intention behind Gin's character design choices and the motives for the things he did. An easy way in which we can get a better understanding of this is if we take a deeper look at Gin's origins. Beginning with the name Gin Ichimaru. The name Gin Ichimaru can be broken down into 3 different parts, with each bisyllable. In Japanese, Gin means silver, which most likely is in reference to his hair color, and Ichimaru can be translated in a number of different ways. Breaking down the name simply, Ichi means one and Maru can mean festival, man, ring, and it can also mean the Japanese name for a circle, which used to mean correct. The most likely definition is silver one man, because Gin is ironically the only man in the series of Bleach with silver hair. In conjunction with the silver man definition, the name Ichimaru shares a great deal of semblance with Orochimaru, which literally translates to Snake Man, and would make a great deal of sense considering the narrative implications of Gin's presence and how his character is depicted. It should also be noted that alongside the definition of his name, through Gin's battles with characters like Ichigo and even as early as his encounter with Rukia, Gin is constantly being portrayed as a white snake. The white snake in both Japanese and Chinese culture is symbolic of the messenger to the goddess of wealth, good fortune and fertility, Binzaiten. It's a well-known belief that the white snake is the messenger to the human world. Shapeshifters that move quite easily between heaven and in this circumstance could quite literally be in reference to the Soul Society, which Kisuke refers to as the other side, which is a very common colloquialism in Japan, or it could be referring to the underworld. It's widely believed that when a human encounters a snake, especially a white one, it's an extremely lucky omen. In the context of Bleach, this makes a great deal of sense given the metamorphosis of Gin as an innocent starving child from the Rukongai district to someone both menacing and goal-driven enough to earn the acknowledgement of Aizen as an adversary. It's very possible that the fortune aspect pertains to the number of people whose lives were inadvertently or accidentally saved by Gin's input or intervention. Consider Gin's first major on-panel appearance. Gin single-handedly prevents the impending death of the whole team of the Ryoka who come to save Rukia, and allowed them to take a route which had a much greater probability of success to invade the Seirite. And ironically also in his encounter with Rukia, despite her very negative portrayal of Gin using the white snake, he actually reminds her deep down that she really wants to be saved. Conversely, with the Chinese tale of the white snake, we have a tale that celebrates the transformation of love, symbolic of the snake's representation of transformation and change. This is consistent with the transformative nature of Ichigo's mental state in regards to each individual encounter with Gin, as well as his transformative impact on other characters, including people like Aizen in the series. The idea of transformative love accurately encompasses the love-hate relationship between Gin and Rangiku brought about by his personal sacrifice and the misunderstanding brought by it. It should also be noted that while snakes in general have a cross-cultural symbolism of renewal and rebirth, there are negative connotations that do indeed coexist with this symbolism. And again, with most other interpretations of the white snake, this might be in reference to Gin's sacrifice of character in order to increase the success of his century-long task to take down the Soul Society's greatest threat, Sosuke Aizen. Gin as a character from his very first on-panel appearance is able to expose the emotions of people he encounters, including the inner struggle of Byakuya. Despite his facade of certainty, Byakuya is deeply affected by the prospect of Rukia's execution, and Gin actually very carefully uses the word imperturbable. Now for those of you that aren't aware, the word imperturbable implies that Gin's aware that this is a cover-up and is entirely due to the fact that he's hiding his true emotions because he's being bound by the responsibility of his lineage. Alongside instances like this, Gin in many ways embodies the emotional intelligence as well as other characteristics of a very good mentalist. Here's a further example. Gin is able to quickly react and diffuse possible conflict situations, and contrary to his emotionally detached appearance, which I'll soon be touching up on, his word choices usually show a great deal of emotional intelligence, and in most circumstances they cut a whole lot deeper than they should. So why is Gin the way he is? Gin was born in the Rukongai district and had a much higher spiritual pressure than the average wandering soul. Unfortunately for those blessed with immense spiritual pressure, they can no longer survive without food. And alongside the newfound power, they are accompanied with the burden of an immense hunger which led to the fight for survival. Gin adapted better than most and saved Rangiku, another starving child, and this empathy is what would establish their love story. And of course, alongside their short-lived joy came the horror known as Aizen, a lieutenant who wished for none to lie above him, a man who wished to stand even above the gods with an indomitable power. Gin killed whenever necessary and took it upon himself to take down anybody who would ever allow Rangiku to suffer the way she did again. And so, in the midst of Aizen's quest for perfection, he deemed it necessary to sacrifice himself to bring down Aizen and began his lie of a lifetime. To deal with the Soul Society's greatest threat, Gin was willing to become the servant of Aizen, and to mature himself to the point where he could take him down even if it meant by any means necessary, of course excluding his loved ones. So I'm sure you might be wondering, and I know this is bugging me also, why does Gin smile all the time? Gin as a character, whether willfully or by circumstance, developed a behavioral condition or characteristic which would be diagnosed by our modern day psychologists as a smiling depression. The reason a person can have a smiling depression can be one of many things. For instance, an unrealistic ideology in regards to happiness. Another reason is that people feel because of their circumstances that they're in, that they should feel fortunate and do not deserve the luxury of being depressed. And the last, and probably the most likely given the circumstance, is the need to disguise the appearance of seeming weak. People with smiling depression often fear that others will take advantage of them if they reveal their depression. Not only do they worry that others will see them as weak and vulnerable, but they're concerned that others will use their depression as leverage against them. And in the case of Gin and Aizen, this is a major deal. And Kubo's phenomenal writing doesn't just stop there, it even extends to the symbolism of the squads. Kubo chose Gin as the captain of Squad 3 because both Gin and his goal embody the principles of Squad 3 as shown by Kira. Squad 3 is the marigold, which symbolizes despair and is also symbolic of the confidence and pride of the individuals. This reflects heavily with the despair of a life sacrifice for love and the confidence necessary to committing to do so, as well as of course to challenge a person of such power as Aizen. In addition, the pride comes from the thing which made Gin's lifelong lie worthwhile, Rangiku. Contrary to the surface level interpretation of most of Gin's fights, all of these fights actually had a much deeper meaning. Nobody is ever truly able to understand what direction Gin's facing as early as the assembly in Nagote 13 and Toshiro's initial suspicion, and all of his fights preceding that possessed the gravity to question the moral philosophies of anybody he encounters. It should also be noted that most of which had means which far outweighed their method, and were done so with the intention of still keeping him outside of the suspicion of Aizen, but protecting these people. For instance, the preservation of the Ryoka, when Gin took down Jidambo and angered the entire 13 Core Guard squads, the saving of Hinamori, and of course the strengthening of Ichigo to defeat Aizen. Gin's choices and his persona showed the amount of dedication he was willing to demonstrate in order to protect those that he loved. And we learned from Byakuya that Gin feared death. And in spite of his fear, he was able to let his guard down again and again in order to trust Aizen, because the ability to trust Aizen was deemed a necessary tool in order to further his goal. So you might be wondering, why would trusting your enemy be necessary? You see, we already had an instance like this, Aizen and Shinji. Gin was able to learn from the mistakes of Hirako Shinji and how he dealt with Aizen, and rather than the same fear and caution that Shinji had, Gin learned to trust. As we learnt from Shinji's cautious approach to watch Aizen from birth and to keep him close but never too close, he needed to be close enough to know him truly. It was Shinji's lack of faith that led to the success of Aizen's plan. Because he was unable to pick up on Aizen's behavioral cues and tendencies due to his caution, which of course stemmed from a lack of bravery to trust. Similarly to Aizen and Shinji, Gin judiciously observes Aizen as close to him as possible, and both with the knowledge of an ulterior motive of one another, and using the mistakes of Shinji, he slowly developed in order to kill Aizen. It's often overlooked the fact that Aizen's overconfident nature and facade of being invulnerable is entirely due to the Kyokusuigetsu, which he has had so much faith in, and is to date the one and only true thing Aizen has ever deemed as perfect. Aizen, despite his persona, is deeply vulnerable, and he has the tendency to portray himself as invulnerable via the use of the Kyokusuigetsu, something in which he values deeply. Aizen has the tendency of making himself seem invulnerable. For instance, in the Aizen versus everybody fight, he sought to, rather than overpower, to mentally destabilize and demotivate the Gote 13 by creating this illusion of being all-powerful or untouchable by approaching them under the illusion of Kyokusuigetsu. And as he discovers the power of evolution, the Hogyoku, he realizes that he's been dealing with this subconscious ideal of perfection, and Aizen was unable to achieve evolution because, as we learned from Mayuri, with perfection there cannot be room to grow, and therefore evolution cannot exist. Don't mean to brag, but Gin and Ichigo were the only two beings Aizen acknowledged. And Gin and Ichigo just so happened to be the only two beings in the series who were able to facilitate Aizen's evolution. So how does Gin have such an impact in the series? It's not because of power, because there exist far more powerful captains. It's because of Gin's own ability of evolution. Gin himself was able to evolve using his wits and meticulous planning ability. Kubo has this extremely clever way of demonstrating this frightening rate of evolution through his Soul Slayer. For those of you that don't know, we have an Asuchi. Through the use of the name and the essence of an individual's soul, a Soul Slayer or Zanpakuto is created. A unique individual exists within every Soul Slayer, and from Ichimaru we learn something incredibly interesting about the naming system. A name is used to summon the properties of an unreleased Zanpakuto and to mold it into its Shikai state. The naming can also be manipulated to alter the effects of the transformative state. An understanding of the preference of the Soul Slayer, whom has its own unique properties, can allow an individual to manipulate the extent of its transformation. For whatever reason, an individual can purposefully call the Zanpakuto by the incorrect name to alter its properties, and the level of deviation is also dictated by the distaste of the Zanpakuto after hearing the name. And in Gin's case, he is incredibly careful with the minute yet significant differences of the ability, and I think this often gets overlooked. Ichimaru might have been interesting, but Gin was masterful with this. From Sacred Spear to God Spear, from God Spear to God Killing Spear. It's so incredibly subtle that 95% of Bleach fans wouldn't realize, and yet so drastic in regards to its impact and to the speed of the release. And this theory is also demonstrated in the databooks, that the naming can be used to decrease or amplify the speed of the extension of his blade and of the terrifying speeds of its release. With the regular Buto achieving speeds of 500 times the speed of sound, and with Buto Raging the speed doubles. It's important to note that when Gin says that his ability doesn't behave the way it says it does to Aizen, he's referring to Aizen specifically, as he deceptively uses the specific naming choice for the entirety of the time spent with him. And once again, considering all that we've discussed, this is all for the purpose of avenging Rangiku. And with the climax of the fight, we are finally shown the true naming of his Bankai, which is reflective to his honest self. Gin is once again seen as the cunning and poisonous Venom Snake. It's ironic because this is the first time we see the real Gin, but it's also the first and final time we see his true fear, and also the time where he makes the ultimate sacrifice. In hindsight, after rereading Bleach, you begin to notice that Gin's life was truly a tragedy. Gin devoted every passing moment to discovering the point of weakness in Aizen, a flaw unknown to any other but the one who he deemed perfect. Gin saw Ichigo and tried his absolute best to capitalize. He tried desperately to do everything he could to prepare Ichigo to face Aizen. Through experimental attacks and taunts, Gin pierced Ichigo both mentally and physically, questioning the mental state that fuels his power, the state of mind as we learned from Kisuke. Using the full capabilities of his mentalist strategies that he'd been building his entire life to unveil the powers of the true Shikai, which rivaled that of Mugetsu, and in spite of his failure, despite the hard life he had to endure up until that point, though the situation was dire, Gin was still hopeful. But try as he might, Ichigo still lacked the resolve, the desire, the very reason for fighting necessary to overpower Aizen when Gin needed him the most. The Soul Society constantly attempts to motivate him, and it had gotten to a point where they could no longer fuel Ichigo, and he was left with no choice but to send Ichigo home. With death all but assured, he willingly sent himself towards death with the knowledge that just maybe, his sacrifice could buy any form of time, however small, for Ichigo to become the power that could bring down Aizen. And with that, when Aizen rose from defeat after Gin's last resort, after he truly feared and evolved, it really hit me that Gin feared for his life truly. And in his last moments, he died with a determination unlike any other. If you enjoyed the video, as always, consider liking, subscribing, because it helps me out a lot. And I'll see you guys next time.